Hey, this is Christine Pereira, and we are finally here with the Soulful Seller series, and I'm here with Dr. Adrian McIntyre, and thank you for joining.
Hey, it's really my pleasure.
Awesome. So Adrian and I met last week at this marketing conference, and it was so funny. We were talking, I think we were both having different conversations.
Yes.
And then I heard what you did, and you teach about the power of storytelling.
Well, it's funny. This is such a great example for why stories are so powerful. So you and I were sitting at like a 10 top table with a bunch of people, and we were talking to the people next to us. And then when you heard something from across the table, it was just like, meow, and we started talking across the table, and then everybody started listening to us. And it's just, truthfully, it's not because anything that we said was that interesting. It's just, this is the way the human brain works. We are literally hardwired for stories. And, you know, I have little kids. My oldest just turned 4 this last weekend. And his younger brother is 19 months old. And whenever I get out a book and sit down, you know, it's funny, if I want to read them a story and they aren't sitting down to hear it, they're just running around being crazy. All I have to do is actually start reading it out loud. And within 30 seconds, they're sitting there and they're wrapped and they want to know what happens next. Because the way that our brains and language work, it's just so compelling. We can't tear ourselves away. It doesn't matter if you're 6 or if you're 60. So storytelling is really useful when you're trying to connect with people and build a relationship. So I think that's what we're going to talk about.
That's so great. I know. Yes, absolutely. And I love that story about kids. I find that that is so true. My kids have gotten so used to eating and like us reading while they're eating that we went to an event, or no, he had a preschool event, and he was like, we had a little preschool dinner, and he was so confused because there was no story around it. I'm like, okay, we have to maybe tone it down. But so let's talk a little bit about your background, because you have such an interesting background, and you have a PhD in anthropology. Is that right?
That is.
So let's talk a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are, because it sounds like it sounds fascinating.
Well, thank you. I mean, you know, here's what I truly believe. Everybody's background is more interesting than they think. But it takes us a while sometimes to realize that. So, you know, I have a couple of unique things that I didn't have any say in the matter. It was just, you know, the genetic lottery got lucky. I was born into a radio broadcasting family.
Oh, wow.
And so my dad had been fascinated with radio since he was a little kid. In fact, he just told me the other day, he was out here for my son's birthday party, and he told me that when he was 6 years old, he used to listen to shows on the radio. And this is back when radios were like the size of a fireplace, you know?
Right, yeah.
And he used to listen to shows on the radio, and then he got his dad's tape recorder, which was, of course, reel-to-reel tape, and he would record his own radio shows emulating what he was hearing on the radio when he was 6.
So cute.
So clearly, like, my destiny's set long before I would show up on the scene.
Fascinating.
A couple years before I was born, my dad, who was still in his late 20s, came in to take over a small one-room radio station that was at a private college in Southern California. And he didn't know when he accepted the job that the station was actually off the air, and he was coming in to manage it. So over the next 35 years, so the first 2 years of my life, he grew that little one room. First of all, he got it back on the air, and then grew it to one of the largest nonprofit Christian radio stations in the country with over 1 million listeners. So, you know, our family was just in this business of broadcasting, and we had a recording studio that he built at our house. We lived about 4 blocks away from the radio station. And starting when I was 5, we produced a radio show for kids that we recorded every single week in our home studio. My dad wrote the scripts and you know, mixed in all the music, but then family sat around with microphones. So I've been on the radio since I was 5.
Wow.
And, you know, just kind of, again, that's just random. I mean, there's, you know, so one thing I want to say is that's what kind of has given me an insight into the power of all of this. But there's nothing that says you have to have that kind of background to be a great storyteller. And I want to talk about that more in just a couple of minutes. But, you know, as my life unfolded, I didn't realize, to be honest, I didn't know that this was going to be important. In fact, that show, we recorded 3 years of it, and then it played in reruns till I was in my 30s. by which time it was more of an embarrassment to me than something like now. I'm actually kind of proud of that. I'm like, wow, that was really amazing that we did that.
Right.
But it was just sort of this annoying thing to hear this squeaky voice little kid and people, oh, I thought you were so much younger. It's just, so I was taking my own path in life and was, don't let the PhD part fool you. I was never, like an academic superstar. I was the kid that was, always like hiding behind the bookcases, like taking apart, calculators instead of actually sitting there and doing my math problems. And so, I kind of had this unconventional path through school where I was learning lots of stuff, but none of it in the classroom. And I got in a lot of trouble for that. And just, began to, as I grew into adulthood, try to find my way. And the other thing that I was blessed with, again, without choosing it, was that my family traveled a lot. So my first international trip, I was 18 months old. My dad was actually going to Vienna with the radio station to cover a big event there. And we just kept doing that. And so, I traveled a lot in the Middle East, again, with my family and on these trips starting when I was 10, and just kind of kept this international stuff up. So to summarize, without getting too bogged down in the gory details, by the time I was in my late 30s, I had lived all over the world. I had worked a variety of different jobs. I had been a journalist. I had worked, began to work as a humanitarian aid worker. Funny story for another time. I ended up working for Newsweek, covering the invasion of Iraq almost by accident.
Oh, wow.
So I'm getting a little lost in my own story, but anyway, bottom line is here I've been drifting all over the world, not realizing that the common thread that held everything together was this role in communication, media, and storytelling. Probably the pinnacle of that was in 2004, which is now a long time ago, but I was working for Oxfam, at one of the big international relief organizations.
Right.
And went to Darfur, which is a place in the Sudan that at the beginning of 2004, nobody had ever heard of. And by the end of 2004 was the biggest news story of the year. And I'm proud to say helped make that happen. I mean, obviously there was other folks working with other relief agencies, Save the Children, the UN, et cetera. But we made that crisis in Darfur, it hit the headlines by telling stories of what was happening to villagers who were being attacked, and those crimes against humanity being committed there. And at the same time, while I'm proud of that, I also ended up heartbroken in a way, both literally and kind of existentially. And so decided to come back to the States after this whole period of time, living in Iraq, living in Israel, working in the occupied Palestinian territories, working in Darfur. Decided to come back and settle down and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Finished my PhD. And that was when I really kind of stumbled backwards into this world of online business and entrepreneurship. And it was there that for the first time, I sort of realized, there's an opportunity here to use my skills to help people who are trying to help other people. Regardless of whatever you're selling, at the end of the day, if your heart's in the right place, the thing you're selling is going to make somebody's life better. I don't care if it's a shovel, or a service or, whatever it is. And if you have a great product or you have a great service, or even if you've been thinking about it, you just know you want to do something, there's never been a better time to be in business. Having said that, there's never been more noise. There's never been more, people competing for the attention of your market. And stories are the secret sauce. I was just realizing this morning as I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to say here that, whenever we look at somebody who's done an amazing product launch, for example, they've sold a course, they've made $1 gazillion or whatever they've done. And we're envious of that. We think, oh man, I wish I could do that.
Right.
The secret to their success is usually hiding in plain sight. And so if I could say, at the end of this long rant, if I could say one thing that I wanted people to take away from this, it's start paying attention to the storytelling that's happening all around you. The people who are winning in business, in the nonprofit world, in any cause-related thing, the people who are getting the attention of the media or the marketplace, whether for good or for bad, politics is a great example here. The people who are getting the attention are telling the best stories.
Right.
The ones that,
yeah.
the ones that connect with people and move them to action.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that's so true. And I was going to say, and stories are the one thing that are completely, your story, like each person's personal story is the one thing that's completely unique to them. And like you were saying, there's so much noise out there.
Yeah.
And there's so many people who are doing, similar things out on the marketplace, especially selling online and entrepreneurs. And a lot of people have asked me, like, how do I feel confident or how do I sell when I'm doing the same thing as someone else? Or maybe I don't even have the degree that someone else has. I don't have the experience, but it always comes back to you are unique because you have your own unique story. And that is what's going to resonate with someone, right? Like my story is going to resonate very much with someone for some reason, and yours is going to resonate for some reason because there's some kind of like personal connection. Exactly. So you want to talk about that in storytelling a little bit?
Well, what you said hits the nail right on the head. Mm-hmm. So human beings crave connection. Mm-hmm. And too many times we think that there's some way we have to perform in order to look good to the marketplace or to our peers or whatever. Right. We have to talk about our best qualities. We have to put, Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest unfortunately encourage this kind of, showing off, mode. And there's nothing wrong with that. It can be entertaining sometimes. But people don't connect with perfect. People connect
very
with
true.
Real.
Yes.
Okay. So we all want to connect. Let's say we're in business, and let's make no bones about it. If you're in business, you have to sell or you're going to go out of business. Mm-hmm. Just that's the simple reality of it. If you're not selling stuff, you don't have a business, you have a hobby. There's nothing wrong with hobbies. Right? Hobbies usually cost you money.
That's a great quote, by the way.
And so if you're spending too much money on stuff and you're enjoying what you're doing, that's great. We just call that a hobby. Like my Aunt Jeannie, who's one of the closest family members to me, is a master quilter, and she has rooms in her house with floor to ceiling like archives of fabric and things. And but that's a hobby, and she exhibits those things. She puts them in contests, but she doesn't sell them. She gives them away, or whatever. A business requires revenue, or it won't last long, right? Mm-hmm. And we think that in order to connect with our audience and sell our stuff, we have to talk about what's so great about it. And some of that's true. Mm-hmm. But prior to all of that, there's a human connection that has to get made. And if it doesn't get made, no problem. The marketplace will just move on to the next person. So if you have something that you want to sell and you feel like you're not getting enough attention, you're not selling enough, people aren't paying attention to you, you're probably also focusing on the wrong things. What I see, like we were at this event with 1,000 people, some of them very successful in their online business, some of them just beginning, and they really want, and in some cases they really need this to work. They've kind of gone all in, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but if you have something and it's not selling enough, too many times people will think, well, I need to work on my strategy. I need a better strategy.
Right. My copy isn't written the right way, or people are obsessing about.
Well, maybe I need to use webinars or Facebook ads, those are really more tactics than strategies. But or I need to maybe do a product launch following Jeff Walker's product launch formula and do all of that sort of stuff. Or maybe I need a different approach altogether. Maybe I need to make a membership site. Anyway, they're thinking at the level of strategy. Nothing wrong with it. You actually do need a good strategy, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Right. So they're either focusing on that, or sometimes they think, well, I just need more skills. So I better learn video editing, and I better learn WordPress, stuff, because I need to, and so they spend all this time working on those skills. Now, some of those are great. And if you are compelled to develop those skills, awesome. Some of them you probably shouldn't waste your time on. Just pay somebody. Your time is worth more than that. Right. Or they're focusing on the stuff like the marketing technology. Should I use MailChimp or Aweber or ActiveCampaign, or what about it? Entrepreneur is also really good. And should I hook that up to Thrive Themes or Lead Pages or ClickFunnels or Kajabi or,
It can get very,
And you can get carried away with all of those things. Now, you have to have a good answer to each of those questions. What skills do I need? What strategy do I need? And, like what marketing tech do I have to make this business work? But spending all your time on that is missing the foundation of all of it. The foundation of all of it is that fabric of human interaction. Who are you? What's your story? What do you do? I would, it's amazing to me how many people can't answer the question, what do you do?
Yeah, that's so true. And speaking of that, like we were at this conference, and I don't know if you were at the last conference about 6 months ago.
No,
but
I was at it in 2014 and then just recently,
Okay.
so I wasn't at that middle one.
Okay, so we're talking about a conference that someone named Jeff Walker. He's a very successful internet marketer who, by the way, has an amazing story, right? Yeah. He has this great story about how he got there, and it's very compelling. And he's been telling the story for a very long time. But the truth is, it's a great story, so he sticks with it. But it was very interesting. My big takeaway from the last time I was at that conference was, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is he called on a few people who had very personal stories about abuse within their families that they were very scared to share.
Yeah.
And one woman ended up, publishing a book, and I think it's doing very well. But it was very interesting because she was up there talking in front of 1,000 people, and she had said, like, I've never told the story in public to this many people. And I mean, the entire room was in tears. Talk about connection. I mean, we were just like, oh my gosh, like this woman is speaking so directly from her heart. And I came away from that thinking, this is so interesting. I thought like the thing, and then there was another person who had a similar story that was a little bit different, but again, so personal, so authentic and from the heart. I actually interviewed him a couple months ago. His name was Max. But I thought the thing that we're most scared to share with people, or that we feel like the most vulnerable about, is probably the thing we need to share, and that the thing that we can connect with people. So I'm curious, like, what are your tips around, like, is that something that you teach people, and about something like very, very personal and kind of scary? So
the short answer is yes. And I've found through experience and practice, I mean, one of the things that I didn't mention in my background is for 5 years prior to launching my own online business in 2012, I was also a program leader for one of the world's leading personal training and development companies. I traveled all over North America, leading large weekend workshops, to 100, 150 people, where they were dealing with some of the most difficult things in their lives, and also looking at how do I take my performance to the next level. And so I'll say this: sometimes you have to heal first before you're ready to share the story. But it's always a time to start working on that privately. So
and these two people had both healed from their stories. They felt comfortable enough sharing them. So I think that's a good tip, though.
They were at the point where they were ready, and they were still scared, spitless, right? They were still shaking, because listen, anytime we talk about things that are deeply personal, the amazing thing about stories, just kind of at a meta level for a second, is a really great story takes something that happened and makes it into something that's happening as the story is being told. You follow me? So something happened in the past, and when you share the story about it, if it's a good story, well told, it's happening now in the experience of the listener, but also the teller. Okay. So as you're sharing a story, you are connected to the emotions, to in some cases the pain.
So is it like you're bringing it into the present? Is that what you're saying? You're like connecting it,
and you're making it real. See, the other thing about stories is that our stories are never really about us, even when they are. For the people listening, they're hearing themselves in what's being shared. Now, sometimes it's about a situation or a traumatic event that the listener has not personally experienced. But the amazing thing about human beings is we've all experienced something. We've all been hurt. We've all been embarrassed. We've all been really stressed. We've all been down. So we can relate to those moments, right? And so when somebody's sharing something, and it doesn't have to be a tearjerker. I mean, it certainly can. But, it just has to be real, because when it's real, it's relatable. We can hear ourselves in it. For many years when I was leading these workshops, I used to share a story about something that happened to me in the 4th grade when I had started, first of all, to notice girls and think they were interesting instead of icky, right? And there was this day, particular day that I remember. the door opened in the classroom and this strange girl walked in, and it was, partway through the year, and she was transferring into our class, but just like the light shining behind her as the door opened, and she had transferred in from a school in Hawaii to where I was in Southern California. And she really looked like this little Hawaiian goddess, like was wearing this floral dress and had a red flower behind her ear. And it was the first time I think I ever was smitten, like right in a moment. And I had heard, that kids were doing this thing called going out. I didn't know what that was, but all the cool kids were doing it. And so as we passed notes around, as you do in fourth grade, I was asking my friends, who is that? Do you think she likes me? Like, she doesn't know you, like, whatever. Finally, over a period of time, I worked up the courage, and we were all out on this school field trip, and we were playing mini golf. And I went up to her and I said, hey, so it's been really fun hanging out with you. Do you want to go out with me? Now, remember, I don't know what that means. Right? And she smiled the sweetest smile. My heart melted, and she looked at me and she said, yes. I was like, awesome. Aww. Okay, great. Now what? She said, well,
now what does that mean?
We the bus boarded and we went back, and I was so excited. I'm like, I've got a girlfriend. And went home the next day, as we were getting ready for school, I told my mom, like, I need 2 apples in my lunch today, so one for me, one for my girlfriend. And she was like, all right, great. Cute. Well, so I walked up to school the next morning, right before class. I got dropped off, and there she was standing outside the door. And I thought, she's waiting for me. This is awesome. And she had a little group of girlfriends with her, and they were standing in a circle. So as I walked up, the circle kind of opened, and there she was standing in the middle, but she didn't have an excited, happy look on her face. She looked very stern and very serious. And as I walked up, she looked me right in the eyes and said, Adrian, I've given this a lot of thought, and we are not going to go out. And I was crushed right there in the moment. Like, the whole world just seemed like it was over for me.
Right.
And I made a decision right there in that moment. Girls are tricky and they can't be trusted. And we all do this when, in situations we make decisions, and then they start to affect how we live our life. So, it's a silly little story. And, there's more to it. Ironically, we're still Facebook friends, but today in 2016, but, that may not have happened exactly that way to you or to anybody else, who's watching this, but something happened, and you were, there's something with boys and girls, or girls and girls, or boys and boys, and whatever, some playground incident, something where there was humiliation, where there was embarrassment, and you can relate to it. Now, I'm not sharing that story because I'm trying to sell something about, elementary school education.
Right.
But, you get the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great story. And I like how you really set it up, and I'd love to ask you a couple tips, because what I noticed about that story, I mean, obviously we could relate to it, but I like how you also, you gave a great visual in the beginning about what she looked like, and I can really imagine it. So can you give people like 3 tips for like creating a great story?
So the first thing starts with, you have to, and I won't dwell on this because this is something that I do cover in some of the in-depth training we do. It actually takes a little bit of time, but I'll tell you what it is. And that is, you have to do a kind of inventory of your own life. And I've developed a process to help with that. So you really just kind of map it out, because I think one of the things people start with is, well, I don't even remember stuff that happened. Except
right. A lot of people say that. My husband always says that. He's like, I can't remember anything from when I was younger. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't remember. I just remember little, bits. But
exactly. And that's completely fine. And then the other thing is that part of the reason why we can't remember is too often there's a few things we can't forget. Okay. So something upsetting, something traumatic, something that painful or hurtful or a period of time. So most people start this story work process relating to their past like a source of pain or shame or embarrassment or boredom, like, well, my childhood was lame. I don't, nothing happened, whatever it is. And so part of the process has to be at first that you actually do some reflection and assessment and discover there's actually treasure hidden in your own story. Some of it's going to relate to your business or to the services you provide, freelancers. Some of it's not. And that's okay, but you got to do this work first. You got to start working on the storyteller before you start to get to the story. So that's there's a whole thing about it. That's why I teach and coach and train. There's a whole process there, but that's the basic idea. Do an inventory of your life and identify some of these things and start to look for patterns. But when it comes to stories themselves, I like to say that it's a little bit like cooking. Okay. So if I were going to give you a storyteller's cookbook, it would first of all have sections like types of recipes, types of stories, categories, like appetizers and fish and, right. Whatever. Green smoothies, right? Depends on what kind of book it is. And then within each of those sections, you'd find, a set of ingredients that show up all the time in the best recipes. And then you'll find the recipe itself, how you put those ingredients together. So the basic recipes for any good story are pretty straightforward. Every story has a when and a where. Okay, that's the scene or the setting, and it's you want that to be concrete. And how you make it concrete is you make it specific. So I didn't tell you, the year and the day. It was a Tuesday, but I was in the 4th grade. Okay,
right.
So that's specific, and because you've been in the 4th grade, presumably. You kind of immediately know the setting. I didn't even have to tell you that the desks were lined up in a particular way. And at the back of the room, there was this bulletin board with, stuff, because you already know that. But if I was telling a story where something about the physical setting was important to the unfolding of events, I would try to specify it as short as possible. In this case, I just really said, I was in the 4th grade and I was sitting in the classroom, the door opened and the light shone in. Notice I'm making it concrete. Now, every story, so in addition to a when and a where, every story needs a who. Who are the main characters? You're usually one of them. But in business, one of the most powerful stories you can tell doesn't have anything to do with you. You can tell the story of a client or a customer. You can tell the story of a product where actually the product's the main character. Or you can even share a story about somebody else that you don't even know, which I can give you an example. One of my favorite ones of those, but I'll do that in a minute if you want.
Yeah.
So the characters, and those characters have to be relatable, even the bad guys. Okay, so if a story, like our kids have stories with whatever they have in them, my son, for some reason, the only thing I can think of right now is Paw Patrol on TV. My son, my 4-year-old, loves Paw Patrol.
I am very familiar with Paw Patrol.
Any parent is watching this in 2016. Yeah. So, but there's no real bad guys in there, but there is the other mayor, right? There's the good mayor, Mayor Goodway, right? And then there's the other mayor, Mayor Humdinger. And as much of the time as Lachlan, my son, likes to play, the Paw Patrol guys, he also likes to play Mayor Humdinger and the Bad Kitties.
Right.
Because they're just as relatable in a way. So he'll say, Daddy, you're Mayor Humdinger and you do the voice and I'll be, the bad kitty. And so we play that.
Well, it's like Star Wars. Yeah. All the boys want to be Darth Vader for some reason. And I'm like, and it's so funny because I'll always say like, well, why don't you want to be Luke? Or, sometimes my daughter wants to be Princess Leia, but more often than not, she wants to be like, God, I forget, there's some other bad guy. She wants to be some other bad guy and he wants to be Darth Vader.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's very interesting. And all the boys in school want to be Darth Vader, which is...
It's exactly because the brilliance of those epic... and it's, by the way, it would be the same thing if we didn't have movies or television and we were just reading, epic literature or even oral history that was being retold. Those characters embody qualities that people relate to,
right?
Including the ones that are on the dark side. So to speak.
Yeah, well, it goes back to you saying like, like people, portraying themselves as perfect. No one relates to that perfectness. People, I think, relate to imperfection. So exactly, that makes sense.
So in our core ingredients, we've got the what and the the when and the where, or the scene. We've got the who, which is the characters, and then we've got what happened. which is the action.
Right.
Now, it's important for people to know that bad stories will just tell you what happened as a sequence of happenings. You know, a really terrible story would be Joe got up in the morning, climbed out of bed, got into his Chevy Caprice, backed out at the driveway, turned left, drove down the street to the grocery store, went inside, bought a half gallon of milk and 3 bananas, paid for them, got in his car, and drove home. The end.
Right.
I mean, there's a bunch of happenings, but who cares? Because there's 2 levels at which you want to be talking about what happened. One is the external physical world, but the other, more interesting, is the internal world. So in my story, I told you that the door opened and she walked through, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I could have said, and my heart nearly stopped. I had a hard time breathing because she was it was the first time I experienced being smitten. So I'm talking about the internal world. So what happens outside in the physical world and inside in the internal world. So, you know, remembering that is really important. And then the energy, the aliveness, the vitality, the juice of a story comes from the emotion as it unfolds. The emotion is that internal struggle, you know, that moment when, you know, I it's hard to do when the frame is so close here, but, you know, if I'm telling the story on stage, you know, I might be acting out a little bit. There's a little physicalness to this, as I was holding my little backpack on my shoulder, right? And then I saw her and I was so excited, but then the circle opened, and when she said that, and I was crushed, and I just kind of slump a little bit.
Right.
So sharing the emotion. And then there's an ingredient in all great stories that is so important, and it goes back to something you were talking about earlier. This is a story works if this ingredient is there, and it flops if this ingredient isn't there. And this ingredient is simply the truth. The truth. And there's a couple of ways that you can think about that. One is like, well, is it a true story? Did that really happen?
Right.
And of course, we want to tell true stories, but that isn't what I mean. What I mean is a story works when there's a moment where the truth is told. And in fact, a simple shorthand, if you're the storyteller, simple way to remember this is to actually remember to say at some point, and the truth is, whatever comes after, and the truth is going to be revealing something true.
Right. And and it sounds like that's going to be an internal.
Yeah. So for example, I started my business in 2012, and I was really excited. I'd been studying, you know, before I actually like took something to market and made it available, had a buy button on a website. I'd been studying marketing courses and going to seminars since 2010. The truth is, I had no idea what I was doing.
Right.
Now that's actually a true story. And also there's a moment there where you're like, yeah, I can relate. Who can, right?
Right.
So the truth is really important. And then usually there's an outcome, you know, some sort of resolution. Sometimes there's a turning point. Just depends on the structure of the story. But I like not to make this too complicated. You know, there's books on a very famous book on story called Story by Robert McKee, which is this huge volume, and it's very intricate and goes into all these details. It's written primarily for filmmakers and script writers, screenplay people. But there's something about that just becomes almost like the periodic table of elements, and it's like you have to be a chemist in a lab mixing up these arcane, you know, things that combine in particular ways. I don't think you have to go that far. I think most people can start with some situation. And sometimes it's easier to start with the situation, like an event. Well, there's that thing that happened. How could I build a story around that? Sometimes it's easier to start there, and other times it's easier to start with the outcome. And maybe the outcome was some insight that you had, or some decision you made that changed the course of your life, or you know, something that you know, something else. Start from there and then realize, well, what led to that? And then come backward, and you'll find the story. Right. Sometimes it helps to have a coach, but you know, it's nothing. One thing before you say what you were going to say is I really like to emphasize this to people. It's really important to understand. By virtue of being human, everyone has native fluency in the language of story. And some people have practiced it more than others. Okay. But there's nothing about this that's not like, well, I'm not a story person. It's just not
right.
You have a
If
brain.
you're a human,
You have
you're
a brain.
person.
If you are a human and you have, relatively, I resist the word normal, but you have what you might say, within normal functioning, right? Cognitive abilities, you are wired for story like everybody else. And actually, without getting bogged down, and I'm probably going to get flamed for this, no matter how far down the spectrum you go in either direction of high or low functioning, the story part is probably going to stick all the way through, because fundamentally stories are about emotion, and everybody has those. So
yeah. So I was going to ask, and I don't know if it's because I'm paying attention more, but I feel like the hero's journey is something that everyone is talking about recently. I've seen a lot of people in the hero's journey, if you're not familiar, is kind of, it's like the classic Star Wars story, right? Like there's a guy, a regular person, he overcomes, a great challenge, and then, and you really relate to him, and then at the end he wins. And there's a lot more complexity, obviously, in there.
Sure.
Like, do you think that's overly complicated, or is that something that you follow as well, and then maybe you modify it?
So the hero's journey started out as a framework developed by Joseph Campbell, who was, a brilliant student of comparative mythology, and widely read. Hard to pin him down into a category. He was a scholar, but he was also a practitioner studying world religions, world mythologies, sacred texts, storytelling and he identified this template, if you will, called the hero's journey, and it has these stages on it. I think that can be really really powerful. However, I also think you have to be a little careful with it, because it was designed for epic stories. And sometimes you need to tell stories with a small s, not a capital S. Story.
Right. Not every story is a life-changing story.
Not every story has follows the pattern of the life of the Buddha, right? Where and I don't even remember all. I think there's 8. I don't remember phases in the hero's journey. Just Wikipedia hero's journey. You'll find the whole thing. So what I find is there's a few very simple plots that you can use to craft compelling stories. Sometimes, though, you don't even need one of these. You're just going to tell an anecdote that leads to you sharing an insight or a decision, a realization, something that you had. But so the simple plot structures that I like to teach are, the first one you might just call good versus evil. And that could be so many different ways. It could be an individual versus an individual. It could be an individual versus society, somebody versus themselves, overcoming something. Twister, that film from a long time ago about the people chasing tornadoes, the tornado scientists. It's like you versus nature. So in any case, the main character in the good versus evil story is defined by their struggle against something or someone. Okay, so struggle against something or someone. Another story framework that I really like is you might call the epic journey, which is kind of like the hero's journey. And the main character is defined by their search for something. So good versus evil, they're defined by their struggle. Epic journey, they're defined by their search. And, this could be a story told in business. I was doing this and that didn't work, and I was looking for this and that, and I finally found this. A lot of people who are sharing something that they've learned that helped them could easily use this kind of epic journey frame. Lord of the Rings, by the way, is also that same, like on a quest for something, trying to accomplish something out there. I was struggling with this. I tried this, that didn't work. I tried that, it didn't work. This is the thing. I reached the bottom. I felt like it was hopeless. And then I finally tried this other thing, and that began to work. So I studied that more, and then I developed this thing. And now I've come up with a framework, and I'm going to teach that to you. Okay. Very simple thing. The ascension, that's another power plot that I teach. And that's where the main characters defined by their rise from something lower to something higher. Okay? Which could be rags to riches, but I don't like that one so much, because then it leaves you at rich and people can't relate. Or it could be just, struggling with something and then, figuring it out. Again, there's some overlap between these things. I don't want to get too bogged down in it. The one that I think is probably the most useful, there's really, maybe 2, something I call the defining moment story, or maybe the moment of truth story. And this one, the main character is defined by their actions in a critical situation. Something forced a choice. They had to make a tough decision, or they failed, and that failure was a defining moment that set them on a new path.
People right. So relate. The big event, right? Like in screenplay writing, it's like the big event, right?
Exactly. I mean, it could be a personal sacrifice. It could be a moment of discovery. Eureka! I found it. Right. In any case, there's a critical juncture or turning point that changes the course of events. That's one that people often can tell. Then the last one I think can be the most powerful if you are willing to be vulnerable, and that's the plot line would just be called the transformation. Basically, in this story, the main character is defined by a change in who or what they are. So, I'll give you an example. One way I could have told this, and I didn't, but I could tell truthfully the story of my work over the past 15 years as a transition from selfish and self-absorbed to service-minded. I really did go through this period, and even all that work in the Middle East and Africa where I was, working on good causes. I wasn't doing it. What I would now say is I wasn't doing it for the right reasons. I was chasing a girl, or I was doing something that was cool, or so. And shifting that perspective. Another one could be, sort of an awakening or coming of age moment. Well, classic one is Christmas Carol, the story of Scrooge. Here's this miserly dude. Who has is rude and mean, and then is visited by these ghosts, and the next morning becomes very generous. Right. We can all tell those kind of stories, but we have to be willing to be honest about the before part, and actually say, I was a jerk, or I just completely was doing the wrong thing, and then I've shifted over. Going back to kids' themes, like the movie Cars. I love that my son loves that movie because there's Lightning McQueen, who starts out as like kind of not like a great guy, is kind of arrogant and full of himself, and he goes through this process where he becomes this really great friend and nice guy. Exactly, that's it. And the whole plot line of that, and it is a transformation theme, is is he going to be the star, or is he? It's just the way you said it's so perfect. Or is he actually going to be Mater's best friend? Is he going to own that identity and do things that a best friend would do, as opposed to a star would do? And Hollywood got this down, right? I think if you look at any blockbuster, you see one of these stories in there. And I'm always amazed at how even the cheesiest movie, like Pitch Perfect, I always use as an example. I don't know if you saw that movie. No. I'm like, that formula works every time. How did I cry at the end of Pitch Perfect? It's so ridiculous, but I did. Yes. Right? Because they got the formula down. They got it. And I'm not sure which one that fits into, but it's so funny because I'll watch those and I'll be like, oh man, they got me. That's how it works. We love a good story, and the truth of the matter. Right. It's true. There's a guy, Christopher Booker, wrote a book called The 7 Basic Plots. There's another guy, Ronald Tobias, who wrote a book called the 20 Master Plots and How to Build Them. There's a dude named Georges Polti who wrote something called the 36 Dramatic Situations. It doesn't matter how many of these you think there are. There's a finite number of them. Right. And for any one, you can list movies. You can list Shakespeare play. It goes back. But the real thing is that I want to bring this around to our entrepreneur audience, or people who really want to, are freelancers, people want to start something or grow something. There's really 4 stories you must be able to tell. And those are the who I am story. And I gave you a really long version, but you're going to need to have a shorter one. The what I do story, which could be 2 simple sentences, but you need to be able to say who you are and what you do in a simple and compelling way. And that's essential for sales. Absolutely. And then here's my value. The what I stand for story. And then the last one I like to call what I saw story. And that's really a catch-all category for anything that you observed or that happened to you that you then learn from. And you can have a lot of those. You'll probably have only 1 or 2 versions of the who I am and what I do. But then what I saw would be a great, so let me tell you, and then you just start relating a short story, small s story, about something that happened to you or something you observed, the insight or the realization that changed your perspective, and what happened after, what happened next. So you want to have a library of these, available, and you can weave them into your marketing. In my course, I actually talk about that. So with all this background, great. Well, how do you storytell on your about page? How do you storytell in your LinkedIn profile? And let's go further. How do you do visual storytelling on Pinterest or Instagram and connect it to your business? So there's a lot of stuff to talk about here, but we're running up on the end of our
we're running out of time. This has been so great.
I get carried away. It's entirely my fault.
No, it's such a rich topic, and I think it's so relevant to like everyone and every part of their lives, and for business owners and entrepreneurs. And I think it's so relevant in sales. But tell us more about where we can find out more about you and your upcoming classes, and we can type in some of the links as well. Okay,
cool. So the basic hub for all of this is the website storyprofit.com. Now, right now, that site's being made over. So right now, there's just simply a way to get a free storytelling e-course, which everybody can have access to, and it'll take you through
and it's free. Okay.
Some of the basics. And then there's two offerings we have for people who want to go deeper. Well, really three. One is the Story Profit system, which is kind of a complete course on everything we've talked about, and that'll be coming, I hope, at the end of May. But it's not really ready yet. The second thing is I'm going to be doing a live version of this in kind of a small group setting, a story makeover or story boot camp. That's going to be 4 weeks. And basically, at the end of the 4 weeks, everybody will have nailed. They'll have a story book with their own who I am story, what I do, what I stand for, and then the what I saw that they can use in their marketing. So it's a specific. We're going to start with the story work I described at the beginning, where they're going to work on their own personal story and go through that process and use the mapping techniques that I've developed. But then we're gonna actually give them, or they're going to do the work in group coaching setting to clarify exactly, so they know they never have any more confusion about their messaging, about what they should say at a networking event or a conference, about what they should say to somebody who says, "So I'd love to learn more about what you do and how I can." They know how to answer all those things. And I don't have a specific date for that yet, but it's going to be starting over. It's going to be running over the summer. So the best way to get any of this is simply to go to storyprofit.com. Get on the mailing list there, or once the new site is unveiled, there'll be descriptions of everything and ways to connect about that. Okay, fantastic. So people can go and find your free class there now, which is fantastic. And then do you also have a Facebook page, or do you post stuff on Facebook at all? I'm on Facebook, Dr. Adrian McIntyre. The other thing I do, just kind of constant in the background, is I do work one-on-one with people who really just want to do this in a private setting, get my full attention. And that's really something we talk about in person. So if you're interested in that, just reach out to me, and we'll have a no-cost consultation. You'll tell me a little bit about you, about your business. We'll see if that's a good fit or not, and I'll go over the details with that. But that's available as well for people who really want to just invest some time in getting this handled, and for people who might have something they're not sure they know how to deal with, a difficult situation. They think it would be important to tell that story, but they don't know where to begin. That's the appropriate setting to do that in, is in a one-on-one coaching, which we usually do over the course of a month. So it's not a long, drawn-out thing. Right. Okay, great. Well, thank you. I know you have to go. I really appreciate your time. You're welcome. So it was fun. Thanks. Yeah, and you guys can find more information about what I'm doing at Soulful Selling Bootcamp. I'm going to type that in. And we do have an upcoming class coming up, and I'm going to absolutely talk about some of this information. So this is great, because I think for anyone who's selling themselves or being an entrepreneur, like having that clear, concise story is so important. So thank you, Dr. Adrian McIntyre. My pleasure. For joining us, and we'll have the recording for everyone as well too. Great. All right. Okay. Take care. See you around. Have a great day. You betcha. Bye. Bye.